In previous segments, I discussed the abuses of power by all three branches of the federal government. In this segment, I want to continue with another power that is significantly abused: war powers. I will start with a question. If you remember back to the Libyan conflict, who decided that the United States should drop bombs on Libya? It was a unilateral act of then President Obama. Did Obama have the authority to do that? He claimed authority through a United Nations resolution. Was he justified in doing that? To get the right answer, again, we have to go to our Constitution. To whom does the Constitution give the power to declare war? Congress and Congress only. That's in Article 1, Section 8. Well, if Congress has sole authority, why did the president think he had the power to unilaterally declare war on Libya? Is a United Nations sanction enough? Unfortunately, Obama is not the first president to do such things. Again, I always go back to the original intent of the founders. Why did they give Congress the power to declare war if the president is the commander-in-chief? Simple. They didn't want that very important power in the hands of just one person. If Congress is the one to decide if we declare war or engage in any military actions, then the process will be slow and deliberate with a general consensus that the operation is needed, not the whims of just one man. A couple of quotes that show this overwhelming sentiment from the founders. At the South Carolina Convention for ratification, Major Pierce Butler, one of the delegates to the federal Constitution, said, "I was one of a committee that drew up this clause and would endeavor to recollect those reasons by which they were guided. It was at first proposed to vest the sole power of making peace or war in the Senate, but this was objected to as hostile to the genius of a republic. By destroying the necessary balance they were anxious to preserve. Some gentlemen were inclined to give this power to the president, but it was objected to as throwing into his hands the influence of a monarch, having an opportunity of involving his country in a war wherever he wished to promote her destruction." At the North Carolina Convention for ratification, Mr. Iredell said, "The president, therefore, is to command the military forces of the United States, and this power, I think, is the proper one. At the same time, it will be found to be sufficiently guarded. A very material difference may be observed between this power and the authority of the King of Great Britain under similar circumstances. The King of Great Britain is not only the commander-in-chief of the land and naval forces, but he has power in time of war to raise fleets and armies. He also has authority to declare war. The president has not the power of declaring war by his own authority, nor that of raising fleets and armies. These powers are vested in other hands. The power of declaring war is expressly given to Congress, that is, to the two branches of the legislature. They have also expressly delegated to them the powers of raising and supporting armies and providing and maintaining a navy." We had a few instances of presidents abusing the war powers by the time of World War II, most notably with Lincoln in the war between the states. However, since World War II, we have seen a dramatic increase of abuse of war powers from many presidents. After both the Korean and Vietnam conflicts, Congress passed the War Powers Act, supposedly to prevent the president from doing anything he shouldn't do with war powers. It passed over the veto of President Nixon, who said it was an unconstitutional infringement on the president's power as commander-in-chief. Nixon had his reason wrong, but I'm convinced that it is unconstitutional for a different reason. Let's look at the War Power Act of 1973 and see what it really did. The act started out good with the following section. The constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief to introduce the United States Armed Forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to 1, a declaration of war, 2, specific statutory authorization, or 3, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. To note, using U.S. forces in self-defense has always been considered a legitimate function of the Commander-in-Chief, not requiring congressional approval. The War Powers Act then contradicts itself with the following. It says, the President in every possible instance shall consult with Congress before introducing United States Armed Forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances. And after such introduction shall consult regularly with the Congress until United States Armed Forces are no longer engaged in hostilities or have been removed from such situations. Then the Act goes on to list how and when the President should, quote, report to Congress after introduction of troops into hostile action. It also gives the President 60 days of hostile action before it must cease, unless Congress declares war or a specific authorization for that operation. It then establishes the action of Congress if they don't like what the President is doing. It says at any time that the United States Armed Forces are engaged in hostilities outside the territory of the United States, its possessions and territories, without a declaration of war or specific statutory authorization, such forces shall be removed by the President if the Congress so directs by concurrent resolution. So, what does that mean? Congress must act as a negative after the fact instead of giving a positive declaration of war or at least authorizing action by the President prior to sending troops. In my opinion, Congress has abdicated the authority and their responsibility of deciding if we are to declare war, meaning to take any offensive action against another country. As a result, presidents think they have the power to send troops anywhere they want as long as they just, quote, consult with Congress, which really means just to notify Congress. This is a very dangerous situation. I don't care who is sitting in the White House. He does not have the authority under the Constitution to take offensive action unilaterally, and anyone who does should be immediately impeached. I believe the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, not because it restricted the president's power, but because it gave power to the president that is reserved for Congress. Personally, if I would have been flying F-15s in order to bomb Libya, I would have raised my hand and asked, where's the authority to do that? I would have been duty-bound to disobey an illegal order, even if coming from the president, which it was because Obama had no legal authority. Of course, I probably would have been court-martialed for standing up for the Constitution. But where were any senior officers with any guts to stand up and say that's an illegal order? Just as we did not let the Nazis get away with the excuse that they were just following orders at the Nuremberg trials, that is also not an excuse for today's military. The United States military should not be used as mercenaries by our presidents. The result of these unconstitutional actions by our president is constant conflict all over the globe. We have gotten far away from the intent of our founders concerning war powers and very far from the just war theory that had been taught in our military. What is just war theory? It's the Christian view that only defensive war is just and allowable. Contrary to some pacifist interpretations of the Bible, God does allow just war. These are wars of self-defense of a nation. Just as individuals are allowed to protect themselves, countries are allowed to protect themselves from invasion or for other defensive reasons. Washington, in his farewell address, warned against entangling alliances like those in Europe that it resulted in constant warfare. We did a good job following his advice, keeping out of such alliances so as not to be sucked into other nations' wars up until World War I. However, since then we have made entangling treaties with so many nations that we are obligated to protect almost every nation on the planet. Of course, this has led to our involvement in many conflicts throughout the world and will surely lead to more. To stop our constant warfare and the notion that we need to be the world policeman, we need to get back to the intent of the founders and have only Congress declare war or authorize any actions by our president other than self-defense.